Chapter 1. The Invitation to the Chateau. The letter arrived on a crisp autumn morning, its cream envelope embossed with a golden crest that shimmered under the dim light of Hercule Poirot's London flat. The Belgian detective, seated at his mahogany desk, adjusted his pince-nez and examined the envelope with a meticulous eye. The wax seal bore the initials LV, unfamiliar yet intriguing. With a delicate flick of his letter opener, he revealed an invitation penned in elegant calligraphy, requesting his presence at Château Vallière, a secluded estate nestled in the rolling hills of Provence, France. The host, Monsieur Lucien Vallière, promised a weekend of intellectual discourse and unparalleled hospitality. No further details were provided, save for a note that other distinguished guests would attend. Poirot's moustache twitched with curiosity. "Mon ami," he murmured to himself, "this is no ordinary summons." The invitation's ambiguity piqued Poirot's interest. Why would a reclusive millionaire, known only through whispers in high society, summon a detective of his caliber? Was it a mere social gathering, or did Vallière anticipate trouble? Poirot's little grey cells hummed as he considered the possibilities. He consulted his friend Captain Hastings, who had recently returned from a hunting trip and was lounging in an armchair by the fire. "What do you make of it, Poirot?" Hastings asked, peering over his newspaper. "Sounds like a jolly weekend in the countryside." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Jolly, perhaps, but I suspect there is more to this chateau than fine wine and pleasantries." Preparations were made swiftly. Poirot, ever fastidious, ensured his wardrobe was impeccable, his patent leather shoes polished to a mirror sheen, his cravat perfectly knotted. By Friday evening, he and Hastings boarded a train to Paris, then a private car arranged by Vallière to transport them to Provence. The journey through the French countryside was picturesque, with vineyards stretching endlessly under a golden sunset. Yet, as the car wound up a narrow road toward the chateau, a sense of isolation crept in. The estate loomed ahead, its stone towers silhouetted against a darkening sky, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. Château Vallière was a marvel of Renaissance architecture, its ivy-clad walls and turrets exuding old-world grandeur. A butler, stiff and formal, greeted them at the entrance, his face betraying no emotion, as he led them through a marble-floored foyer, adorned with tapestries and chandeliers. "Monsieur Vallière awaits you in the drawing-room," he intoned, his voice echoing in the vast hall. Poirot noted the opulence. Every detail, from the gilded frames to the Persian rugs, spoke of wealth and secrecy. In the drawing-room, Lucien Vallière stood by a roaring fireplace, a tall man in his late 50s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes. His tailored suit and confident demeanour suggested a man accustomed to command. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, welcome," he said, his voice warm yet measured. "I trust your journey was pleasant." Poirot inclined his head. "Most agreeable, Monsieur Vallière. But I confess, your invitation has stirred my curiosity. Why have you summoned Hercule Poirot?" Vallière's smile was enigmatic. "All in good time, monsieur. Tonight, we dine and meet the others. Tomorrow, I shall reveal the purpose of this gathering." Before Poirot could press further, the butler announced the arrival of other guests. First came Madame Celeste Dubois, a renowned opera singer whose beauty was matched only by her sharp wit. Her emerald gown shimmered as she swept into the room, her eyes scanning the company with a predator's instinct. Next was Dr. Felix Moreau, a retired surgeon with a gaunt face and nervous hands, muttering about the chateau's unhealthy air. Then entered Miss Eleanor Gray, a young English heiress with a reserved demeanour, clutching a leather-bound journal. Finally, Baron Heinrich von Stahl, a German industrialist, strode in with an air of arrogance, his monocle glinting as he surveyed the room. Poirot observed each guest with his usual precision, noting their mannerisms, the way Madame Dubois' fingers lingered on her pearl necklace, the faint tremor in Dr. Moreau's grip on his cane, Miss Grey's guarded glances, and the Baron's imperious posture. Hastings, ever the optimist, whispered, "Quite a colourful bunch, eh, Poirot?" The detective nodded, his mind already cataloguing potential motives. "Oui, Hastings, but in such colours one often finds shadows." As the group exchanged pleasantries, Valliere raised a glass of champagne. "To new acquaintances and revelations," he toasted. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Poirot sipped his drink, his eyes never leaving the host. Valliere's charm was undeniable, yet there was a tension in his smile, a flicker of unease that suggested he knew more than he revealed. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining hall, a cavernous room with a long oak table set with crystal and silver. The meal was exquisite: foie gras, roasted pheasant, and a delicate sorbet. But Poirot's attention was on the conversation. Madame Dubois spoke of her recent tour in Milan, her voice dripping with pride, while Dr. Moreau grumbled about the decline of modern medicine. Miss Grey remained silent, her eyes darting to Valliere whenever he spoke. The Baron, meanwhile, boasted of his factories in Munich, his tone laced with condescension toward less industrious nations. Valliere steered the discussion with ease, yet Poirot sensed an undercurrent of rivalry, as if each guest harboured a secret grudge. As the evening drew to a close, Valliere stood, his silhouette framed by the candlelight. "My friends," he said, "tomorrow I shall share a matter of great importance, a decision that will affect us all." His words were met with curious glances and guarded smiles. Poirot's moustache twitched again. "A decision, Monsieur Valliere?" he asked lightly. "Of what nature?" Valliere's eyes met his, unreadable. "Patience, Monsieur Poirot. All will be clear in the morning." The guests retired to their rooms, and Poirot lingered in the drawing-room, his mind racing. The chateau's grandeur masked something darker, an atmosphere of anticipation, as if the walls themselves awaited a storm. He examined a portrait above the fireplace, depicting a stern-faced ancestor of Valliere's, and noted a faint scratch on the frame, as if it had been recently moved. "Curieux," he muttered, filing the detail away. As he and Hastings ascended the grand staircase to their rooms, a distant rumble of thunder echoed outside. "Sounds like a storm's coming," Hastings remarked. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Indeed, mon ami, and I suspect it will not be confined to the skies." In his room, Poirot sat at a small desk, reviewing the invitation once more. The crest, the cryptic wording, the eclectic guest list, it all pointed to a puzzle. He closed his eyes, letting his little grey cells work. Somewhere in this chateau, a secret was brewing, and Hercule Poirot was determined to uncover it before it turned deadly. Chapter 2. Arrival amidst the storm. The sky over Provence had turned a menacing slate grey, as Hercule Poirot's car rattled along the winding road to Château Valliere. The air was thick with the scent of impending rain, and distant flashes of lightning illuminated the rugged hills. Inside the car, Poirot sat erect, his gloved hands folded over his cane, while Captain Hastings fidgeted beside him, peering out at the darkening landscape. "Dashed gloomy place, isn't it, Poirot?" Hastings remarked, his voice betraying a touch of unease. Poirot's eyes, sharp and observant, flicked toward the chateau's silhouette ahead. "Gloomy, perhaps, mon ami, but it is the gloom that often conceals the most intriguing truths. The car lurched to a stop before the chateau's iron gates, which creaked open as if reluctant to admit visitors. The butler, Monsieur Gérard, awaited them at the entrance, his black suit stark against the pale stone of the chateau. His face was a mask of professionalism, but Poirot noted the slight tightening of his jaw as he ushered them inside. The foyer was as grand as Poirot remembered from the previous evening's arrival. But now, with the storm brewing, the chandeliers cast flickering shadows that danced across the walls like spectres. As Poirot and Hastings shed their coats, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed from the staircase. Madame Celeste Dubois descended, her crimson shawl trailing like a comet's tail. "Monsieur Poirot!" she exclaimed, her voice a melodious blend of charm and urgency. "You've arrived just in time. This dreadful weather threatens to trap us all." Her eyes sparkled with something more than mere concern. Perhaps excitement, Poirot thought. He bowed slightly. "Madame, a storm may confine the body, but it liberates the mind to observe." The drawing-room was alive with the murmur of voices as the other guests gathered. Dr. Felix Moreau stood by a window, his thin frame hunched as he muttered about the barometric pressure. "Unnatural weather," he said to no one in particular, his fingers twitching around a glass of brandy. Miss Eleanor Gray sat in a corner, her journal open but untouched, her gaze flitting nervously towards the door. Baron Heinrich von Stahl paced near the fireplace, his boots clicking on the polished floor, his monocle catching the firelight as he grumbled about the inconvenience of the storm. Lucien Vallière entered last, his presence commanding attention. His silver hair was neatly combed, but Poirot noticed a faint pallor in his cheeks, a contrast to the confident host of the previous night. "My friends," Vallière began, his voice steady but laced with tension, "I fear the storm will keep us here longer than planned. The roads are impassable, and the telephone lines are down." A murmur rippled through the group, and Poirot's moustache twitched. Isolation, he knew, was a catalyst for secrets to surface. The group settled into uneasy conversation, the storm's howl providing a grim backdrop. Madame Dubois recounted a tale of a stranded opera troupe in Vienna, her laughter bright but forced. Dr. Moreau, growing agitated, spoke of a patient he'd lost to a storm-induced fever years ago, his eyes darting to Vallière as if seeking a reaction. Miss Gray remained silent, her fingers tracing the edge of her journal, while the Baron scoffed at the superstitions of weather omens. Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair, sipped a tisane and listened, his mind cataloguing every word, every glance. As the afternoon waned, the storm intensified, rain lashing the windows like 1,000 tiny whips. Vallière invited the guests to explore the chateau's library, a vast room lined with leather-bound tomes and antique globes. Poirot lingered by a shelf, his fingers brushing a volume of Balzac, when he noticed a photograph tucked behind a candelabrum. It depicted a younger Vallière with a woman and a child, their faces obscured by a crack in the glass. "Interesting," Poirot murmured, slipping the photograph back into place before anyone noticed. Dinner was served in the same grand dining hall, but the mood was subdued. The storm's ferocity seemed to press against the walls, and the candlelight cast long shadows that made the guests appear as caricatures of themselves. Vallière attempted to lighten the atmosphere, sharing anecdotes of the chateau's history, tales of duels, hidden passages, and a long-lost family fortune. Yet his stories only deepened the unease. particularly when he mentioned a cursed sapphire, once owned by his ancestor, rumoured to bring misfortune to its possessor. Madame Dubois leaned forward, her eyes gleaming. "Is this sapphire still in the chateau, Monsieur Vallière?" she asked, her tone teasing but sharp. Vallière hesitated, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face. "It is merely a legend, madame," he replied. But Poirot noted the way his hand tightened around his wineglass. Miss Grey's pen scratched furiously in her journal, and Dr. Moreau coughed, a dry, nervous sound. The Baron, meanwhile, smirked, as if privy to a private joke. As the meal concluded, Vallière rose, his expression grave. "Tomorrow I will share the true purpose of your invitation," he said, his voice cutting through the room's tension. "It concerns a matter of great personal significance, one that may alter the course of our lives." The guests exchanged glances, some curious, others wary. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "A matter of such weight, Monsieur Vallière, must be most delicate," he said softly. Vallière met his gaze, a shadow passing over his features. "Indeed, Monsieur Poirot, I trust your discretion." The group dispersed to their rooms, the storm's roar following them up the staircase. Poirot lingered in the hall, his gaze falling on a tapestry depicting a knight and a dragon. A faint draught stirred the fabric, revealing a hairline crack in the wall behind it. "Curieux," he whispered, making a mental note to investigate further. Hastings, yawning, clapped him on the shoulder. "You're seeing mysteries in every shadow, old chap," he said. Poirot smiled faintly. "Shadows, mon ami, are where the truth often hides." In his room, Poirot sat by a small fire, his notebook open. He sketched a diagram of the guests, connecting them with lines of suspicion and motive. Madame Dubois' charm masked ambition. Dr. Moreau's nerves suggested guilt or fear. Miss Grey's silence hinted at a secret. The Baron's arrogance concealed calculation. And Vallière, his cryptic words and uneasy demeanour, pointed to a man on the edge of a revelation. The storm outside raged on, its thunder a grim prelude to the chaos Poirot sensed was coming. As he extinguished his lamp, a distant sound caught his ear, a faint creak like a door opening in the night. He rose, his senses alert, but the sound did not repeat. "The chateau speaks," he murmured, settling back into his chair. Tomorrow, he resolved, he would uncover its secrets, before the storm, or something far darker, claimed them all. Chapter 3. The lavish banquet, the dining hall of Château Vallière, glowed under the light of a dozen chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering rainbows across the polished oak table. The storm outside raged on, its thunder muffled by the thick stone walls, but within, the atmosphere was one of forced gaiety. Hercule Poirot, seated to the right of their host, Lucien Vallière, surveyed the scene with his usual precision. The table was a masterpiece of opulence. Silver candelabras, porcelain plates rimmed with gold, and a centerpiece of roses that perfumed the air. Yet, beneath the grandeur, Poirot sensed a current of unease, as if the guests were actors in a play, each concealing their true lines. Captain Hastings, seated opposite Poirot, marvelled at the spread. Roast duck glazed with honey, truffle risotto, and a delicate asparagus soufflé. "Good heavens, Poirot! This is a feast fit for royalty," he exclaimed, his fork poised over a slice of duck. Poirot's moustache twitched. "Oui, mon ami, but even the finest feast may hide a bitter taste." His eyes darted to the other guests, cataloguing their behaviours as the meal began. Madame Celeste Dubois, resplendent in a sapphire blue gown, held court with her charm, her laughter ringing like a bell as she recounted a scandalous anecdote from her Paris opera days. Yet Poirot noted how her gaze lingered on Vallière, searching for a reaction. Dr. Felix Moreau, seated beside her, ate sparingly, his fork trembling as he pushed food around his plate. His mutterings about poor digestion did little to mask his agitation. Miss Eleanor Gray, her journal tucked beside her, picked at her meal in silence, her eyes flitting between Vallière and the Baron, Heinrich von Stahl, who sat at the table's far end, his monocle glinting as he pontificated about European trade tariffs. Vallière presided over the banquet with a practised ease, his silver hair catching the candlelight as he raised a glass of Bordeaux. "To our shared company," he toasted, his voice smooth, but carrying a weight that silenced the room. The guests raised their glasses, though Poirot observed reluctance in some. Dr. Moreau's hand shook, and Miss Gray's toast was a mere formality. The Baron, however, smirked, his glass held high as if to challenge the host's authority. Conversation flowed like the wine, but Poirot detected undercurrents of tension. Madame Dubois steered the talk to Vallière's past, probing with a smile. "Monsieur, you've lived such a secluded life here. Surely there are tales of your youth to share?" Vallière's smile was tight. "My youth, madame, was unremarkable. It is the present that concerns me." His deflection was smooth, but Poirot noted a fleeting glance toward Miss Gray, who blushed and looked away. Dr. Moreau, emboldened by the wine, spoke up, his voice sharp. "This chateau has a history, Vallière. They say your grandfather lost a fortune gambling. Is that why you guard your wealth so closely?" The room stilled, forks pausing mid-air. Vallière's eyes narrowed, but he laughed, a sound devoid of humour. "Rumours, doctor. My grandfather's only vice was trusting the wrong people." The comment hung in the air, and Poirot's mind raced. Trust, or its betrayal, was a motive worth exploring. The Baron, sensing an opportunity, leaned forward. "Trust is a luxury in business," he said, his German accent clipped. "Wonder, Vallière, what brings such a diverse group together? Surely not mere hospitality." His tone was provocative, and Poirot noted the way Vallière's fingers tightened around his glass. "Patience, Baron," Vallière replied. "Tomorrow all will be revealed." As the main course gave way to dessert, a decadent chocolate torte, Vallière stood, commanding attention. "My friends," he began, his voice resonant, "this gathering is no accident. Each of you was chosen for a reason, tied to a matter I will disclose tomorrow morning. It concerns my legacy, and a truth that has been buried too long." His words were cryptic, and the guests exchanged glances, some curious, others wary. Madame Dubois' eyes sparkled with intrigue, while Dr. Moreau paled, his napkin crumpling in his fist. Miss Gray's pen scratched furiously in her journal, and the Baron's smirk widened, as if he anticipated the revelation. Poirot leaned back, his mind cataloguing the scene. Vallière's announcement was a spark in a room full of dry tinder. He observed the guests' reactions. Madame Dubois' calculated curiosity, Dr. Moreau's barely concealed panic, Miss Gray's guarded intensity, and the Baron's smug confidence. Each, he suspected, held a piece of the puzzle Vallière was about to unveil. The meal concluded with a round of cognac, and the guests began to disperse. Poirot lingered, his gaze falling on a silver tray near Vallière's seat, where a single glass bore a faint smudge of lipstick. Not Madame Dubois' shade, he noted, but a softer pink, perhaps Miss Gray's. "Curieux," he murmured, filing the detail away. As he rose, He caught Valier's eye. "A most intriguing evening, monsieur," Poirot said. Valliere nodded, but his expression was strained. "Sleep well, Monsieur Poirot. Tomorrow will demand your keenest attention." As the guests retired, Poirot and Hastings walked the dimly lit corridor to their rooms. The storm outside had calmed to a steady rain, but the chateau's silence felt heavier, as if holding its breath. Hastings yawned. "What do you make of Valliere's talk of legacies, Poirot? Sounds like he's planning to rewrite his will." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Perhaps, mon ami, but a legacy is not always measured in gold. It may be a secret or a sin." In his room, Poirot sat at a small desk, his notebook open. He sketched a timeline of the evening, noting each guest's behavior and Valliere's cryptic words. The smudged glass, the photograph from the library, the crack in the tapestry wall, all were threads in a tapestry of motive and opportunity. He closed his eyes, letting his little grey cells work. The banquet had revealed much: rivalries, fears, and a host on the verge of exposing a dangerous truth. As he prepared for bed, a faint noise reached his ears, a soft thud like a book falling in a distant room. He paused, listening, but the sound did not repeat. "The chateau whispers its secrets," he said softly, extinguishing his lamp. "Tomorrow," he resolved he would unravel them, before the storm within these walls turned deadly. Chapter 4. The Midnight Scream. The Chateau Valliere lay shrouded in an uneasy silence, broken only by the occasional drip of rainwater seeping through ancient stone. Hercule Poirot, in his velvet dressing gown, sat by the window of his guest room, his notebook open under the soft glow of a single lamp. The storm had subsided to a restless murmur, but the air within the chateau felt charged, as if the walls themselves anticipated calamity. His pen paused over a diagram of the dining hall, mapping the guests' positions during the banquet, when a piercing scream shattered the stillness. It was a sound of raw terror, echoing from the depths of the chateau. Poirot was on his feet in an instant, his senses alert. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, slipping on his patent leather shoes and seizing his cane. Captain Hastings burst through the adjoining door, his hair dishevelled, his pyjamas askew. "Good Lord, Poirot, what was that?" he exclaimed, clutching a candlestick as if it were a weapon. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Trouble, mon ami. Come, we must investigate." The corridor was a labyrinth of shadows, lit only by flickering sconces. The scream had come from the direction of the library, and Poirot moved with surprising agility, his small frame navigating the winding staircase with purpose. Other doors creaked open as guests emerged, their faces pale with alarm. Madame Celeste Dubois, her hair in curlers but her poise intact, clutched a silk shawl. "Who screamed? Is someone hurt?" she demanded, her voice sharp. Dr. Felix Moreau, his nightshirt rumpled, muttered incoherently about bad omens. Miss Eleanor Gray, clutching her journal, stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide. Baron Heinrich von Stahl appeared last, his dressing gown immaculate, his monocle in place, as if he'd been expecting trouble. The library door was ajar, and a faint glow spilled into the hall. Poirot entered first, his hand raised to silence the others. The room was as grand as before, its shelves towering under the weight of ancient books. But the scene at its centre was grim. Lucien Valliere lay slumped in a high-backed chair by the fireplace, his eyes staring blankly, a crimson stain spreading across his white shirt. A silver letter opener, its handle encrusted with emeralds, protruded from his chest. The window was locked, The heavy oak door showed no signs of forced entry, and the only sound was the crackle of the dying fire. "Mon Dieu," Poirot whispered, his voice steady despite the horror. He knelt beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Valier's face was frozen in a grimace of surprise, his hands clutching the chair's arms. Poirot noted a crumpled piece of paper beneath the chair, its edge singed as if it had brushed the fire. He retrieved it with a tissu handkerchief, revealing a fragment of a handwritten note. "Must be told, betrayal." The rest was illegible, charred beyond recognition. Hastings, pale but resolute, stood guard at the door. "He's dead, isn't he, Poirot? Stabbed in his own library." The guests crowded behind, their gasps and murmurs filling the room. Madame Dubois clutched her shawl tighter, her eyes darting to the letter-opener. "That's Valier's own blade," she whispered. "He showed it to me yesterday, said it was a family heirloom." Dr. Moreau, trembling, muttered about blood loss, while Miss Grey's journal fell to the floor, her hands shaking. The Baron's voice cut through the chaos. "This is madness! Who could have done this?" Poirot rose, his expression grave. "Calm yourselves, mes amis. Hercule Poirot is here, and the truth will not escape me." He turned to the butler, Gérard, who had appeared silently at the door, his face ashen. "Monsieur Gérard, when did you last see Monsieur Valliere alive?" The butler swallowed hard. "At 11, sir, when he retired to the library. He said he wished to work on private matters." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And the door? It was locked?" Gérard nodded. "I heard the bolt slide myself." Poirot examined the door's heavy bolt, intact and unforced. The windows, too, were secure, their latches rusted with age. "A locked room," he murmured, his little grey cells already at work. He turned to the guests. "Did anyone hear or see anything unusual after retiring?" Silence followed, broken only by Miss Grey's soft voice. I heard footsteps in the corridor just before midnight." Her words were hesitant, her eyes avoiding the others. The Baron scoffed. "Footsteps! This old pile creaks constantly." But Poirot noted the girl's unease, filing it away. He instructed Hastings to keep the guests back and began a meticulous inspection. The letter-opener was clean of fingerprints, wiped with care. A faint smear of ash on the hearth suggested something else had been burned, perhaps deliberately. A glass of cognac on the desk was half empty, its rim free of lipstick or smudges, unlike the one Poirot had noted at dinner. The photograph he'd seen earlier, of Valliere with a woman and child, was missing from its hiding place behind the candelabrum. Madame Dubois' voice broke his focus. "Monsieur Poirot, surely the storm has trapped us with a murderer." Her tone was theatrical, but her eyes betrayed genuine fear. Dr. Moreau, sweating despite the chill, muttered, "We're all doomed in this cursed place." Miss Grey retrieved her journal, clutching it like a shield, while the Baron's composure remained unshaken, his gaze calculating. Poirot addressed the group. "Mesdames et messieurs, until the authorities arrive, I will take charge. No one leaves this chateau, and no one touches this room. The truth lies in the details, and Hercule Poirot will uncover them." He gestured to Gérard. "Secure the library and summon the staff. I must know their movements tonight." The butler nodded, his hands trembling as he obeyed. As the guests were ushered back to their rooms, Poirot lingered, his eyes sweeping the scene. The singed note, the locked door, the missing photograph, all pointed to a crime planned with care. Valliere's cryptic promise of a revelation at the banquet now took on a darker meaning. Had he been about to expose a secret that cost him his life? Hastings, lingering at the door, whispered, "This is a nasty business, Poirot." A locked room, a dead host. How do you even begin? Poirot's moustache twitched. With method, mon ami. The little grey cells see what others miss. Someone in this chateau knows the truth, and I shall find them. As he returned to his room, the chateau's silence felt heavier, its shadows deeper. The scream still echoed in his mind, a warning of the danger that lurked within these walls. Tomorrow he would interrogate the guests, probe their secrets, and unravel the mystery of Lucien Valliere's death, before the killer struck again. Chapter 5. Poirot Takes Command. The morning after the midnight scream dawned grey and heavy, the storm's remnants cloaking Chateau Valliere in a damp mist. Hercule Poirot stood at the library's threshold, his eyes scanning the scene of Lucien Valliere's murder. The body remained untouched, the silver letter opener still protruding from the host's chest, its emerald handle glinting dully in the muted light. The locked door, the singed note, the missing photograph, all were pieces of a puzzle that Poirot's little grey cells were determined to solve. With the roads impassable and the authorities delayed, the responsibility fell to him. The truth, he murmured, hides in the order of things. Captain Hastings, bleary-eyed from a sleepless night, joined him, his voice low. "This is a grim business, Poirot. A man stabbed in a locked room. How do we even start?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "With method, mon ami. First, we secure the scene, then we question. The killer is among us, and they cannot hide from Hercule Poirot." He summoned the butler, Gérard, whose pallor betrayed his shock. "Monsieur Gérard, gather the staff in the drawing-room. I will speak with them first, and ensure this library remains locked. No one enters without my permission." Gérard nodded, his hands unsteady as he departed. Poirot then turned to Hastings. "Mon ami, fetch the guests. We begin with the facts, and the facts begin with them." The drawing-room was a stark contrast to the previous night's opulence, its grandeur dimmed by the weight of death. The guests assembled, their faces a gallery of unease. Madame Celeste Dubois, her usual vivacity subdued, sat with her hands clasped tightly. Dr. Felix Moreau, his eyes bloodshot, fidgeted with his cufflinks, muttering about the tainted air of the Archduke Chateau. Miss Eleanor Gray clutched her journal, her knuckles white, while Baron Heinrich von Stahl stood by the window, his monocle catching the light as he surveyed the group with disdain. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his small frame commanding the room. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and authoritative, "Monsieur Valliere has been murdered, and the storm confines us with the killer. Until the authorities arrive, I, Hercule Poirot, will conduct this investigation. You will answer my questions with honesty, for the truth cannot be concealed." Madame Dubois raised an eyebrow. "And what makes you think we'll trust a stranger to play judge?" Her tone was sharp, but Poirot noted the tremor in her voice. He smiled faintly. "Madame, I am no stranger to justice. My methods are precise, and my results are certain. Now, let us begin." He started with the crime scene, recounting the facts. Valliere was stabbed in a locked library. The letter opener, a family heirloom. The singed note hinting at betrayal. "Who among you," he asked, "saw or heard anything unusual after retiring last night?" Miss Gray hesitated, then repeated her claim of hearing footsteps near midnight. "They were heavy, deliberate," she said softly, her eyes avoiding the others. Dr. Moreau scoffed. "This old house groans constantly. You're imagining things, girl. But Poirot noted the doctor's sweating brow, his defensive tone. The Baron spoke next, his voice clipped. "I slept soundly, Monsieur Poirot. This is a waste of time. The killer could be a servant or an intruder." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "An intruder, Baron? In a locked room, with windows sealed and no signs of entry? No, the answer lies within this chateau." Madame Dubois shifted uncomfortably, her fingers tracing her pearl necklace, a gesture Poirot had seen her repeat under stress. He turned to the staff, now assembled at the room's edge. Gérard recounted his last sighting of Vallière at 11, confirming the library door was bolted. The maids, two nervous young women, claimed they were in their quarters, while the cook, a stout man named Pierre, insisted he'd been cleaning the kitchen. Poirot's questions were relentless, probing for inconsistencies, but the staff's stories held, for now. Returning to the library, Poirot conducted a second inspection. The singed note, still clutched in his handkerchief, bore the words, "Must be told. Betrayal." He examined the fireplace, finding traces of ash that suggested more than one document had been burned. A faint scratch on the desk caught his eye, as if something heavy had been dragged across it. He measured the distance from the desk to Vallière's chair, noting the absence of blood spatter beyond the immediate area. "The killer was precise," he murmured, "and close to their victim." Hastings, hovering nearby, whispered, "What about motive, Poirot?" Vallière was about to reveal something big. Maybe one of them wanted to stop him. Poirot nodded. Exactement. His announcement at the banquet was a catalyst. We must uncover what he intended to reveal. Back in the drawing room, Poirot questioned the guests individually. Madame Dubois admitted to a brief conversation with Vallière after dinner, discussing her upcoming performance in Nice. "He seemed distracted," she said, her eyes avoiding Poirot's. Dr. Moreau claimed he'd retired early, citing a headache, but his nervous stammer suggested more. Miss Grey, when pressed, admitted she'd lingered in the corridor, hoping to speak with Vallière about a personal matter. The Baron was dismissive, insisting he had no interest in Vallière's sentimental nonsense. Poirot's mind raced, piecing together timelines and behaviours. The singed note suggested Vallière had been writing something incriminating, perhaps related to his promised revelation. The missing photograph hinted at a hidden past, possibly a family secret. And the locked room, how had the killer entered and exited? He recalled the draft behind the tapestry in the hall, a clue to a possible hidden passage. As the day wore on, the guests grew restless, their alibis fraying under Poirot's scrutiny. He dismissed them, instructing Gérard to keep watch. Alone with Hastings, he said, "The killer believes they have outwitted us, mon ami, but they underestimate the little grey cells. Tomorrow, we dig deeper, into secrets, into lies." The chateau's silence returned, heavier now, as if mourning its master. Poirot sat by his window, the mist outside mirroring the fog of the case. The scream, the note, the locked door, all pointed to a truth buried in the chateau's shadows. He closed his notebook, his resolve firm. "The game is afoot," he whispered, "and Hercule Poirot will not be defeated." Chapter 6. Whispers in the shadows. The Château Vallière seemed to hold its breath as the second day dawned, the mist outside thinning to reveal a landscape bruised by the storm. Hercule Poirot stood in the library, where Lucien Vallière's body had been carefully covered but not yet removed, pending the authorities' arrival. The silver letter opener, the singed note, and the locked room remained a tantalizing puzzle. But Poirot's little grey cells were now focused on the living. The guests' guarded glances and halting alibis hinted at secrets deeper than he'd first suspected. "The truth," he murmured, adjusting his pince-nez, "is whispered in the shadows of their words." Captain Hastings joined him, rubbing his eyes. "Slept poorly, Poirot. This place feels like a tomb." Poirot nodded, his gaze fixed on the fireplace's ash pile. "A tomb, perhaps, mon ami, but one that speaks. We must listen." He had spent the morning reviewing his notes. Madame Dubois' evasive charm, Dr. Moreau's nervous tics, Miss Grey's cryptic journal, and Baron von Stahl's calculated arrogance. Each was a thread in a tapestry of motive, and today Poirot intended to pull them loose. He began his interrogations in the drawing room, where the guests sat in uneasy silence, the grandeur of the chateau now oppressive. Madame Celeste Dubois was first, her silk scarf draped elegantly, but her eyes wary. "Monsieur Poirot, this is absurd," she protested. "I barely knew Vallière beyond social circles." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but piercing. "Yet you spoke with him alone after dinner, madame. What was the nature of your conversation?" Her fingers tightened on her scarf. "A trifle. Talk of my next performance. He was preoccupied." Poirot noted her hesitation, sensing a half-truth. "And did he mention a betrayal?" he pressed, recalling the singed note. Her eyes widened briefly before she laughed. "Betrayal? No, monsieur, you read too much into shadows." Dr. Felix Moreau was next, his gaunt face slick with sweat despite the morning chill. "I've done nothing," he stammered, his hands twisting his handkerchief. Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "You spoke of Vallière's grandfather at dinner, doctor, with bitterness. Was there a personal grievance?" Moreau's eyes darted to the door. "Mere gossip. I treated his family years ago, nothing more." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And what treatment precisely required such discretion?" Moreau paled, mumbling about patient confidentiality. But Poirot sensed a deeper connection, perhaps financial or familial. Miss Eleanor Gray, clutching her journal like a talisman, was more forthcoming but no less guarded. "I heard footsteps," she reiterated, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I saw someone in the corridor, a shadow moving toward the library." Poirot leaned closer. "A shadow, mademoiselle? Male or female? Tall or short?" She hesitated, her fingers trembling. "Tall, I think. It was too dark to be sure." Her reluctance suggested fear, not deceit, and Poirot wondered what secret she guarded in her journal. Baron Heinrich von Stahl was last, his demeanour as imperious as ever. "This is a farce, Poirot," he scoffed, adjusting his monocle. "Vallière was a fool, flaunting his wealth. Likely a servant snapped." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yet you, Baron, have much to gain from wealth, no? Your factories face ruin, I hear." The Baron's smirk faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Rumours, monsieur. My finances are secure." Poirot noted the lie, sensing a motive rooted in desperation. Between interrogations, Poirot returned to the library, examining the scene anew. The singed note's words, "must be told, betrayal," suggested Vallière had uncovered a secret worth killing for. He inspected the desk, finding a faint indentation in the blotter, as if a heavy object had rested there. A search of the shelves revealed a hidden compartment behind a false book, containing a ferraille to a single key, its surface tarnished but ornate. "Curieux," Poirot murmured, pocketing it with his handkerchief. The key, he suspected, might unlock more than a door. In the afternoon, Poirot gathered the staff again, probing their movements. The maids, Marie and Claire, admitted to overhearing an argument in Valier's study days before, though they couldn't identify the voices. Pierre, the cook, mentioned a missing kitchen knife, dismissed as a misplacement, but Poirot's mind connected it to the letter opener, perhaps a decoy. Gérard, the butler, remained stoic, but his eyes flicked nervously when asked about Valier's private papers. As evening approached, Poirot explored the chateau's corridors, his cane tapping softly. The draught behind the tapestry, noted earlier, led him to a concealed panel. Pressing it revealed a narrow passage, its walls damp and cobwebbed, leading toward the library. "Aha!" he whispered. "The locked room is not so locked." The passage's existence suggested the killer had a way in and out, but who knew of it? Valier's talk of a cursed sapphire resurfaced in his mind, perhaps an heirloom tied to the missing key. Dinner was a tense affair, the guests barely touching their food. Madame Dubois whispered to Miss Grey, who nodded curtly, while Dr. Moreau's hands shook as he sipped his wine. The Baron, unusually silent, watched Poirot with a predator's intensity. Hastings, sensing the strain, whispered, "They're all on edge, Poirot. Think one of them will crack?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "They will, mon ami, when the pressure is right." As the meal ended, Poirot stood, his voice commanding. "Mesdames et messieurs, the killer believes they have outwitted us, but they are mistaken. Tomorrow, I will uncover more of this chateau's secrets, and theirs." His gaze swept the room, noting each guest's reaction. Madame Dubois' forced smile, Moreau's flinch, Grey's tightened grip on her journal, and the Baron's cold stare. In his room, Poirot sketched a new diagram, linking the passage, the key, and the singed note. Valier's death was no random act. It was tied to his promised revelation, perhaps a betrayal from his past, a lover, a debt, or a hidden heir. The whispers in the chateau's shadows were growing louder, and Poirot was determined to make them speak. As he extinguished his lamp, a faint creak echoed from the corridor, like a footstep on old wood. He paused, listening, but the sound faded. "The chateau watches," he murmured, his resolve unshaken. Tomorrow, he would follow the whispers to their source, and to the killer. Chapter 7. The Poisoned Chalice. The Chateau Valier seemed to pulse with secrets as the third day broke, a pale sun struggling through the lingering mist. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his notebook open, his little grey cells weaving together the threads of Lucien Valier's murder. The locked library, the singed note, the hidden passage, and the tarnished key. The guests' guarded alibis and the staff's nervous glances pointed to a web of deceit, but a new event was about to deepen the mystery. As Poirot prepared to interrogate further, a cry of alarm echoed from the dining hall, shattering the morning's uneasy calm. Captain Hastings burst into the room, his face flushed. "Poirot, come quickly! It's Madame Dubois. She's collapsed." Poirot's eyes sharpened, and he followed Hastings with swift, purposeful strides. The dining hall was in chaos. Madame Celeste Dubois lay slumped in her chair, her face pale, her breathing shallow. A silver chalice, overturned on the table, spilled a dark liquid that smelled faintly of almonds. Dr. Felix Moreau knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he checked her pulse. "She's alive, but barely," he stammered. "Poison, I'd wager. Cyanide, perhaps." Poirot took command at once, his voice cutting through the panic. "Stand back, mes amis! Touch nothing!" He examined the chalice, noting its ornate design, identical to those used at the banquet. A faint residue clung to its rim, and the spilled liquid had stained the tablecloth. "Monsieur Gérard," he called to the butler, who hovered nearby, "who served this morning's coffee?" Gérard, his face ashen, replied, "Marie, one of the maids, but the chalices were set out last night." Poirot's moustache twitched. And who had access to them? The guests gathered in a tense circle, exchanged wary glances. Miss Eleanor Gray, clutching her journal, whispered, "I saw Madame Dubois sipping from that chalice just before she collapsed." Baron Heinrich von Stahl, his monocle glinting, scoffed, "This is madness! First Valliere, now this! Someone is targeting us all!" Poirot's gaze swept the room, noting Dr. Moreau's sweating brow, Miss Gray's trembling hands, and the Baron's forced bravado. Madame Dubois, revived slightly by Dr. Moreau's efforts, moaned softly, her eyes fluttering open but unfocused. Poirot instructed Gérard to fetch water and keep the chalice untouched, then turned to Dr. Moreau. "Doctor, you suspect cyanide. How quickly would it act?" Moreau, still shaken, replied, "Within minutes, if ingested. She's lucky to be alive. Perhaps the dose was small." Poirot nodded, his mind racing. A second attempt on a life suggested desperation, or a killer covering their tracks. He recalled Valliere's talk of a cursed sapphire, and the singed note's hint of betrayal. Was Madame Dubois a target because she knew too much? He resumed his interrogations with renewed urgency, starting with Marie, the maid. She tearfully insisted she'd only poured coffee, unaware of any tampering. "The chalices were on the sideboard all night," she said, her voice trembling. Poirot's eyes narrowed. "And who passed through the dining hall after dinner?" Marie hesitated, then admitted, "I saw Dr. Moreau near the sideboard late last night. He said he was looking for a book." Moreau, overhearing, protested, "Nonsense! I was in my room." But Poirot noted the doctor's flushed cheeks, a sign of guilt or fear. Miss Gray, questioned next, seemed shaken by the poisoning. "Madame Dubois was asking about Valliere's announcement," she said softly. "She thought it involved a will." Poirot pressed her. "And you, mademoiselle? Your journal? Does it hold secrets about Valliere?" Her eyes widened, and she clutched the book tighter. "It's private. Notes about my travels." Poirot sensed she was hiding something, perhaps tied to her late-night wanderings. The Baron was defiant, dismissing the poisoning as hysteria. "Madame Dubois is a performer," he sneered. "Perhaps she seeks attention." But Poirot noted the Baron's clenched fists, a sign of strain beneath his arrogance. He recalled the Baron's financial troubles, wondering if Valliere's legacy, or the sapphire, had tempted him. Poirot returned to the dining hall, examining the sideboard. A faint scratch on its surface matched the one on the library desk, suggesting an object had been moved between rooms. He revisited the hidden passage he'd discovered, finding it led not only to the library, but also to a storeroom near the dining hall. "Aha!" he murmured. "The killer moves freely, unseen." The tarnished key from the library fit a lock in the storeroom, revealing a dusty box containing a velvet pouch. Inside was a sapphire, its deep blue facets catching the light, a jewel matching Valliere's tale of a cursed heirloom. Back in the drawing room, Madame Dubois, now stabilized, recounted her last moments before collapsing. "I sipped the coffee. It tasted bitter," she whispered. "Then everything blurred." Poirot's mind connected the dots. The sapphire, the passage, the poisoned chalice. Someone had access to both the library and the dining hall. Someone who knew the chateau's secrets. Dinner that evening was a grim affair, the guests barely speaking. Dr. Moreau's hands shook as he ate. Miss Gray's journal remained unopened, and the Baron's monocle hid eyes that darted nervously. Poirot, observing, announced, The killer grows bold, but they will not escape. The sapphire, the note, the passage, they all point to a truth I will uncover." His words stirred unease, and he noted each reaction. Moreau's flinch, Gray's tightened lips, the Baron's cold stare. As the guests retired, Poirot lingered with Hastings. "This poisoning, mon ami, is a warning," he said. "The killer fears exposure. We must act swiftly." Hastings frowned. "But who, Poirot? They all seem guilty." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactement. And that is their weakness. Their guilt betrays them." In his room, Poirot added the sapphire and the poisoning to his diagram, linking them to Valier's murder. The chateau's shadows whispered of betrayal, greed, and hidden truths. As he extinguished his lamp, a faint creak sounded outside his door, like a cautious step. He listened, but silence returned. "The game tightens," he murmured, his resolve firm. Tomorrow he would unravel the chateau's darkest secrets and the killers. Chapter 8. Clues from the Past. The Chateau Valier stood silent under a sky bruised with clouds, its ancient stones seeming to guard the secrets of Lucien Valier's murder and the near-fatal poisoning of Madame Céleste Dubois. Hercule Poirot, his pince-nez glinting in the morning light, paced the library where Valier had met his end. The silver letter opener, the singed note, the hidden passage, the tarnished key, and the sapphire heirloom formed a constellation of clues, but Poirot's little grey cells sought the thread that tied them to the killer. "The past," he murmured, "holds the key to the present crime." Captain Hastings, nursing a cup of weak tea, joined him, his face etched with worry. "This place is a death trap, Poirot. First Valier, now Madame Dubois nearly poisoned. What's next?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Next, mon ami, we uncover the roots of this evil. The killer acts to protect a secret from Valier's past, a secret we must now unearth." Poirot began the day with a renewed inspection of the library. The singed note, with its cryptic "must be told" betrayal, suggested Valier had been on the verge of exposing a long-buried truth. The sapphire, found in the storeroom, matched the legend of the cursed heirloom Valier had mentioned at the banquet. Poirot examined the hidden passage again, noting scuff marks on the floor, as if someone had used it recently. "The killer knew this chateau's secrets," he said to Hastings, "but who among them had such knowledge?" He summoned the guests to the drawing-room, their faces a mix of fear and defiance. Madame Dubois, pale but recovering, sat with a shawl draped over her shoulders, her eyes sharp despite her ordeal. Dr. Felix Moreau fidgeted, his hands twisting a handkerchief, while Miss Eleanor Gray clutched her journal, her expression guarded. Baron Heinrich von Stahl stood by the window, his monocle masking a calculating gaze. Poirot addressed them with calm authority. "Mesdames et messieurs, the murder of Monsieur Valier and the attempt on Madame Dubois are linked to a secret he intended to reveal. I ask you now, what do you know of his past?" Madame Dubois spoke first, her voice steady but laced with caution. "Lucien was a private man, Monsieur Poirot. I knew him only through society events. He spoke little of his family." Poirot noted her careful words, sensing she withheld more. "And you, madame, were not curious about his wealth? His legacy?" Her eyes flickered. "Curiosity is not a crime," she replied, but her fingers tightened on her shawl. Dr. Moreau, sweating profusely, stammered, "I treated his father decades ago. A minor ailment, nothing more." Poirot leaned forward. "Yet you spoke of his grandfather's gambling debts with bitterness, doctor. Was there a financial dispute?" Moreau's eyes darted away. "Mere hearsay. I had no quarrel with Lucien." Poirot's gaze lingered, sensing a lie rooted in shame or fear. Miss Grey, when questioned, admitted to researching Valier's family for a historical project. His grandfather lost a fortune, yes, but there were rumours of a hidden heir, she said softly, her eyes on her journal. Poirot pressed her. An heir, mademoiselle, and did you find evidence in your notes? She blushed, clutching the journal tighter. It's just speculation, she murmured. But Poirot suspected her research held more. The Baron was dismissive, his tone cold. Valier's past is irrelevant. His wealth attracted enemies, nothing more. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And you, Baron, with your failing factories, had no interest in his fortune? The Baron's smirk faltered, but he recovered. My affairs are my own, monsieur. Poirot noted the tension in his jaw, a sign of hidden desperation. Leaving the guests, Poirot explored the chateau's upper floors, seeking clues to Valier's history. In a dusty attic, he found a locked trunk bearing the initials Vu. The tarnished key from the library fit perfectly, revealing a trove of old letters and photographs. One letter, dated 20 years prior, was from a woman named Isabelle, pleading with Valier's father to acknowledge a child, her child. Another photograph showed a young Valier with a woman and a girl, the same image he'd seen in the library, now unmarred. Aha, Poirot whispered, a hidden heir, perhaps. He cross-referenced the letters with Valier's announcement at the banquet, where he'd promised a revelation affecting all. Was he about to name an heir, or expose a betrayal tied to this child? The singed note's mention of betrayal suggested someone feared exposure. Poirot's mind turned to the guests, Madame Dubois' evasive charm, Moreau's nervous guilt, Gray's secretive journal, the Baron's financial woes. One of them, he suspected, was linked to this past. Returning to the drawing room, Poirot confronted the butler, Gérard, about the chateau's history. Gérard admitted that Valier's father had a mistress, Isabelle, who vanished after a scandal. There were whispers of a child, he said, his voice low. Monsieur Lucien never spoke of it, but he was searching for something before he died. Poirot's eyes gleamed. And did anyone else know of this search? Gérard hesitated. Miss Grey asked about old records, sir. She was persistent. Dinner was a strained affair, the guests barely speaking. Madame Dubois, still weak, avoided her chalice, her eyes darting to Dr. Moreau, who spilled his wine in a nervous fumble. Miss Grey scribbled in her journal, her pen moving furiously, while the Baron watched Poirot with a predator's intensity. Poirot, undeterred, announced the past is no longer buried. The sapphire, the letters, the heir, they point to a motive for murder. Tomorrow, the truth will emerge. As the guests retired, Poirot lingered with Hastings. The killer fears the past, mon ami, he said. They struck to silence Valier, and now Madame Dubois, but they cannot silence Hercule Poirot. Hastings frowned. You're getting close, aren't you? Poirot nodded. Close, yes, but the final piece awaits. In his room, Poirot added the letters and photograph to his diagram, linking them to the guests' motives. The chateau's shadows whispered of a child, a betrayal, and a fortune at stake. As he extinguished his lamp, a faint rustle sounded outside. A paper slipped under his door. It was a torn page, scrawled with the words, "Leave the past alone." Poirot's eyes gleamed. The killer grows reckless, he murmured, his resolve unshaken. Tomorrow, he would follow the clues to their end, and to the murderer's heart. Chapter 9. The Gathering Storm. The Château Valier seemed to crouch under a sky heavy with the promise of renewed rain. its ancient walls steeped in the tension of Lucien Valliere's murder and the poisoning attempt on Madame Celeste Dubois. Hercule Poirot stood in the drawing-room, his notebook a tapestry of clues, the locked library, the singed note, the hidden passage, the tarnished key, the sapphire, and now the letters hinting at a secret heir. The anonymous warning slipped under his door, "Leave the past alone," only sharpened his resolve. "The storm gathers, mon ami," he said to Captain Hastings, who stood by the fireplace, his face taut with unease. "But Hercule Poirot will not be deterred." Hastings glanced at the assembled guests, their faces pale in the dim light. "They're all on edge, Poirot. That note, someone's desperate." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Desperate? We and careless. Tonight we will force the truth into the open." His plan was to confront the guests together, using psychological pressure to unravel their lies. The killer, he believed, was teetering on the edge of exposure. The guests filed in, their postures betraying their fears. Madame Dubois, recovered but wary, adjusted her shawl with trembling fingers. Dr. Felix Moreau's eyes darted nervously, his handkerchief soaked with sweat. Miss Eleanor Gray clutched her journal, her lips pressed tight, while Baron Heinrich von Stahl leaned against the mantel, his monocle masking a steely gaze. The air was thick with suspicion, the chateau's silence amplifying every creak and whisper. Poirot stood before them, his small frame radiating authority. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and commanding, "the murder of Monsieur Valliere and the attempt on Madame Dubois are no random acts. They are tied to a secret he intended to reveal, a secret from his past involving a hidden heir and a cursed sapphire. One of you knows this truth and killed to keep it buried." His words struck like lightning, and the guests shifted uncomfortably. Madame Dubois spoke first, her voice sharp. "This is absurd, Monsieur Poirot. I knew nothing of heirs or jewels. I was nearly killed myself." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Yet you spoke privately with Valliere, madame, and your chalice was poisoned. Perhaps you were too close to his secret?" Her cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze, defiant. Dr. Moreau, trembling, stammered, "I'm a doctor, not a murderer. I treated Valliere's father, yes, but that was years ago." Poirot leaned forward. "And did that treatment involve a certain Isabel, doctor? A woman who bore a child?" Moreau's face drained of colour, his denial a weak mumble. Poirot noted the reaction, sensing a connection to the letters in the attic. Miss Gray, when pressed, admitted to researching Valliere's family. "I found records of a child, yes," she said, her voice barely audible. "But it was for my studies, nothing more." Poirot pointed to her journal. "And what does that book conceal, mademoiselle?" "Notes on an heir. Perhaps one you recognized?" Her eyes widened, and she clutched the journal tighter, but she said nothing. The Baron scoffed, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is a witch hunt, Poirot. Valliere's fortune drew vultures, not heirs. Look to the servants." Poirot's gaze was unrelenting. "Or to you, Baron, whose factories crumble under debt. Did Valliere's wealth tempt you?" The Baron's smirk faltered, his hand clenching the mantle. Poirot paced, his voice rising. "Let us consider the facts. Valliere was stabbed in a locked library, yet a hidden passage allowed entry. A singed note spoke of betrayal. A sapphire hinted at a cursed legacy, and letters revealed a hidden child. Last night, someone warned me to stop. Proof the killer fears exposure." He paused, letting his words sink in, then turned sharply to Miss Gray. "Mademoiselle, open your journal now." The room froze. Miss Gray hesitated, her hands shaking, then slowly opened the book. A loose page fell out, bearing a sketch of the sapphire and notes on Valier's family tree, including a name, Isabelle Dubois. Poirot's eyes flicked to Madame Dubois, whose gasp was audible. "Isabelle Dubois?" he repeated. "A relation, madame." She shook her head frantically. "A coincidence! Dubois is a common name." But her voice cracked, and Poirot sensed a lie. Dr. Moreau, unable to bear the tension, blurted, "I knew Isabelle. She was Valier's father's mistress. I delivered her child, a girl. Then she vanished." The room erupted in murmurs. Poirot pressed him. "And where is this child now, doctor?" Moreau's eyes darted to Miss Grey, then away. "I don't know. It was 20 years ago." Poirot noted the glance, suspecting Miss Grey's connection to the heir. The Baron interrupted, his voice cold. "Enough of this nonsense. You have no proof, Poirot." But Poirot smiled faintly. "Proof, Baron? It lies in your reactions, your lies. The killer used the passage, knew the sapphire's hiding place, and feared Valier's revelation. One of you is guilty." As accusations flew, Poirot orchestrated the chaos, planting doubts. He mentioned the missing kitchen knife, watching Pierre the cook flinch. He spoke of the attic letters, noting Madame Dubois' unease. He hinted at financial motives, seeing the Baron's jaw tighten. Miss Grey, near tears, clutched her journal, while Dr. Moreau looked ready to collapse. "The truth is near," Poirot declared, "and the killer knows it." Dinner was abandoned, the guests too shaken to eat. Poirot dismissed them, instructing Gérard to watch closely. Alone with Hastings, he said, "The storm breaks, mon ami. Their lies unravel, and tomorrow I will name the killer." Hastings frowned. "You're sure, Poirot? They're all hiding something." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Exactement, and that is their downfall." In his room, Poirot added the journal sketch and Moreau's confession to his diagram. The heir, the sapphire, the betrayal, all pointed to a motive rooted in Valier's past. The anonymous note under his door was a final desperate act. As he extinguished his lamp, a faint creak sounded in the corridor, like a shadow retreating. "The killer watches," he murmured, his resolve unshaken. Tomorrow the storm would break, and Hercule Poirot would bring the truth to light. Chapter 10. The Little Grey Cells. Triumph. The Chateau Valier stood sombre under a clearing sky, the morning light casting long shadows across its stone walls. Hercule Poirot gathered the guests in the drawing-room, the air thick with anticipation and dread. The murder of Lucien Vallière, the poisoning attempt on Madame Celeste Dubois, the singed note, the hidden passage, the tarnished key, the sapphire, the letters, and the anonymous warning all had led to this moment. Poirot's little grey cells had woven the clues into a tapestry of truth. And now he would unveil the killer. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice steady and commanding, "today Hercule Poirot will reveal the murderer among you." Captain Hastings, standing by the door, whispered, "This is it, Poirot." "You're sure?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Certain, mon ami. The little grey cells never fail." The guests sat in a tense semicircle. Madame Dubois, her face pale but composed. Dr. Felix Moreau, sweating and fidgeting. Miss Eleanor Grey, clutching her journal. And Baron Heinrich von Stahl, his monocle glinting with defiance. The butler, Gérard, and the staff hovered at the edges, their eyes wide. Poirot paced, his cane tapping softly. "Let us review the crime. Monsieur Vallière was stabbed, in a locked library, a silver letter opener in his chest. A singed note spoke of betrayal. A hidden passage allowed access. A sapphire hinted at a cursed legacy. and letters revealed a secret heir. Madame Dubois was poisoned, a warning to silence her. And last night, a note under my door begged me to leave the past alone. The killer is clever, but not clever enough. He turned to the guests, his eyes piercing. Each of you had motive. Madame Dubois, your charm concealed ambition, perhaps tied to Valier's fortune. She gasped, her hand at her throat. "Non, monsieur, I am innocent," Poirot continued. "Dr. Moreau, your guilt over past dealings with Valier's family drove you to panic." Moreau's handkerchief fell, his face ashen. "Miss Grey, your journal holds secrets of an heir, your own perhaps." She froze, her eyes wide. "Baron von Stahl, your failing factories made Valier's wealth a temptation." The Baron's smirk vanished, his jaw tight. Poirot raised a hand, silencing their protests. "But let us reconstruct. Valier planned to reveal a secret, an heir, a child born to Isabelle Dubois, his father's mistress. This child, now grown, stood to inherit his fortune, threatening someone's plans. The singed note, the sapphire, the letters, all pointed to this truth. The killer used the hidden passage to enter the library, stabbed Valier, and burned evidence of their motive. The poisoning of Madame Dubois was a desperate act to silence a witness." He paused, letting the tension build, then turned to Miss Grey. "Mademoiselle, your journal revealed the name Isabelle Dubois and a sketch of the sapphire. You knew of the heir because you are the heir. Valier's half-sister, born to Isabelle." The room gasped. Miss Grey's hands trembled, but she nodded. "Yes, Lucien found me months ago. He wanted to acknowledge me, to share his estate. I kept it secret, fearing rejection." Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Moreau. "You, Doctor, delivered Miss Grey, and Valier's father paid you to keep silent. But Lucien's search for his sister threatened to expose your role in that deception." Moreau slumped, sobbing. "I took money, yes, but I didn't kill him." Poirot turned to Madame Dubois. "And you, Madame, knew of Isabelle, your distant cousin. You hoped to charm Valier into a share of his wealth, but his plan to name Miss Grey as heir thwarted you." She shook her head, tears in her eyes. "I only wanted security." Finally, Poirot faced the Baron. "Baron von Stahl, your factories are bankrupt. Valier's fortune was your salvation, but Miss Grey's claims stood in your way. You knew the chateau's secrets, the passage, the sapphire's hiding place, from your dealings with Valier's father. You stabbed him in the library, using the passage, and burned the note naming Miss Grey. When Madame Dubois grew suspicious, you poisoned her chalice, hoping to silence her." The Baron laughed, a cold, hollow sound. "Preposterous, Poirot! You have no proof." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Oh, but I do. The scratch on the library desk matched one in the storeroom, where you moved the sapphire to hide your knowledge. Your boots bore dust from the passage, and your handkerchief found near the sideboard carried traces of cyanide." He produced the handkerchief, its monogram HVS unmistakable. The room fell silent. The Baron's face contorted, his monocle dropping. "You meddling fool!" he snarled, lunging toward Poirot. Hastings and Gérard restrained him, his struggles futile. "Valier was a fool to trust me," he spat. "His sister would have ruined everything." Poirot nodded calmly. "And so you killed to protect your greed. But Hercule Poirot sees all." As the Baron was secured, the guests exhaled, their relief palpable. Miss Grey, tears streaming, thanked Poirot. "I only wanted my brother's love," she whispered. Madame Dubois, shaken, admitted her jealousy, while Dr. Moreau confessed his shame. Poirot addressed them all. "The truth is revealed, and justice will follow. The little grey cells have triumphed." The authorities arrived later, the roads now passable, and took the Baron into custody. Poirot, with Hastings at his side, stood in the foyer, the chateau's shadows lifting. "A grim affair, Poirot," Hastings said, "but you solved it, as always." Poirot's moustache twitched. "The order and method, mon ami, they never fail." As they prepared to leave, Poirot glanced at the portrait of Valier's ancestor, its scratched frame a silent witness. The chateau's whispers had ceased, its secrets laid bare. "Adieu," he murmured, stepping into the sunlight, his mind already turning to the next puzzle.